again, thank you for joining us here. And as we all know, I'm Milda Mataciunaite. So it's wonderful to see so many IWP people here at the Victims of Communism. So in addition to being the president of IWP, I'm also a board member here at VOC. And I'm one of the founding funders for the museum. And from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for experiencing it with us. And I hope you let everyone you know to come here and see it. And that you also find it in your heart to support the museum in some way, including recommending to teachers, especially high school teachers. There is a full curriculum which Milda perhaps will speak about for high school teachers in the United States. So both IWP and VOC actually share a common mission. And our common mission is focused on freedom. So the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation is an educational, research, and human rights nonprofit organization that is devoted to commemorating more than 100 million people who were killed by communism around the world, and to remember those who are pursuing the freedom even though they still live under totalitarian rule. So the foundation, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, was authorized in 1993 by a unanimous act of Congress signed into public law by President Clinton on December 17th, 1993. And on June 2nd, 2007, President George W. Bush dedicated the Victims of Communism Memorial statue here in DC. And it's actually not far from here, so on one of your trips, it's towards Union Station, right by the Holodomor Memorial. So part of our philosophy at IWP is to teach international affairs through the lens of geography, history, and culture. And at VOC, you are surrounded by history, showing the outcome of failed communist ideology. I will just regress a minute to let you know that freedom we must protect. My grandparents were born into a free country, and their freedom, my grandparents' freedom, was taken away in World War I. My grandparents were taken as slave labor to Germany in World War I. And as you have repeatedly heard, there was World War II, and if you can imagine those same grandparents now in World War II, again fighting for the freedom of their country, were taken into concentration camps. And this time with their children. As I mentioned yesterday, my father and his father were taken to Flossenburg concentration camp, and he was prisoner number 23,504. And my aunt, who you just met, along with the females in the family, were taken to Ravensbrück. Their fate was different because, as I had mentioned yesterday, my father survived because he was liberated by General Patton's 3rd United States Army. The women, some of them did survive in my family after being tortured and raped by our ally, Russia. Now, my mother's fate was very different. She was younger. She was on her first day going to 5th grade to school. being walked to school as she heard noise and looked up and saw planes coming. It was September 1 and the start of the war. My mother was unable to return to school till she was 16. Why? Because she was forcibly ripped from her mother's arms as a child and taken to Germany to slave labor. I'm mentioning that because you have to keep in mind what has happened to hundreds, thousands of Ukrainian children who have been ripped from their parents' arms and the orphanages emptied to be taken to Russia to re-education camps in modern time again. History never ceases. It just keeps repeating. So my parents survived, but Poland's freedom did not. So I was born under imposed communist rule. And growing up as a child, I may have not fully understood what was not right, but I knew something was not right. I remember asking my mother, actually, why does father have a briefcase by the bed and not on his desk? And I was informed. The reason is because that briefcase has all our documents in it. And if there's a knock on the door, we have to flee and we must take the briefcase. And as a graduate student, I can tell you it was quite an experience living under failed communist ideology and their economic system. If you happen to have illegal funds, you could buy anything on the black market. You could buy the best Cuban cigars and the best Russian vodka and the best Russian caviar, as long as you weren't caught. But if you didn't have funds and you weren't risking your safety and security to go on the black market, you literally almost starved. You were given government-issued coupons for your monthly ration of food. And the person who gave you that was the equivalent of the super in your building, so he knew exactly who was there, who was living there, and who was to get these. My aunt had twins. She was allotted small children. She was allotted a coupon to have one pair of shoes. And when she said, but I have twins, and they said, well, give one shoe to each child. Just one other thing about the growing up under the failed communist system was kind of amazing, because your liter of vodka cost less than your liter of milk. Right? Intentional. And we know why. So there were lines for everything, from toilet paper to bread to meat to everything. You had either to pay people to wait hours online for food, or you had to wait online with your coupons, and generally there was nothing left in the store when you went. So when the opportunity presented itself and my parents were able to immigrate legally to the United States, they left everything behind in their native country. And for what reason? They left so my brother and I could fulfill our God-given right to fulfill our potential. And we did. My brother, a Cornell graduate, a Princeton graduate. My cousins, my aunt's children, one's a plastic surgeon in Manhattan, the other is a plastic surgeon in California. The other cousin, astrophysicist for NASA, and now tenure at Stanford. So I can vouch, we gave back for what we received in this country. So we must never forget that history never ends. And personal and religious freedom, fair rule of law, civil society, and human rights can only be achieved in a free society. It is our obligation to continue to protect freedom. And it was Ronald Reagan's warning, and we have to live it every day, that freedom is fragile and only one generation away from extinction. This is why we need to learn and pass this information down to the next generation. So thank you for continuing to educate yourselves. Thank you for being here. And I want to give a special shout out to our sponsors, Julene and Richard Valetudo, thank you. General Steve Sargent, Mitzi Perdue, thank you very much. And just thank you to everyone who contributes. And now let's go on to the program. Finally, yes, thank you. So we have two speakers. Our first speaker, I'd like to welcome Maria Juczewska. Maria is IWP Class of 2019, and she will, yes, go IWP. And she will discuss terror and terrorism as a weapon of war in the Ukraine. Maria is a promising analyst in the field of international affairs, and her main focus is on ethical and humanitarian problems in armed conflicts. So she combines her European background with the American perspective that she learned as a graduate at IWP. And she, aside from being IWP, she also has a dual hat because she's an accomplished fellow here at Victims of Communism. So at present, Maria continues her research. She is a Ph.D. candidate at the War Studies University in Warsaw and immersing herself in the local perspectives in reference to the Russian challenge. And following the presentation, we will have one more speaker, and then we'll open up for discussion and questions. So with that, please welcome.
Thank you, Ambassador Vosh. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me and a great pleasure to present the material I am working on within the scope of my Ph.D. research, which concerns terror and terrorism as weapons of war in Ukraine. And at the very beginning, I wanted to ask a question: how many of you are familiar with the history of Russia, with the history of communism? Am I speaking to, because I'm not sure how much into history I will have to go into. But why we have to study it? Why is it so important? The reason why we have to study is because we want to achieve peace in this conflict with Russia ongoing in Ukraine, but also in the future conflicts. But to achieve peace, we will have to go through some sort of negotiations. And the terms that are established at the negotiation table are very important. We need to understand to whom we are talking, how much space for negotiation we have, what are our values, what are the values of the opponent, and if there is any point at which we can meet in the negotiation. Because if our values are completely different and the values of the other side are completely different, there is not much space to negotiate. And this is very important when we picture the result of the war that is ongoing now. Because I believe that anybody who lives in the Western world imagines the end of the war as negotiation. But we need to understand that not all civilizations follow along those lines, and the peace is not the ultimate value of every society or every nation in the world. There are some nations whose civilizations are guided by a different type of rule and that have different values, and this is core to understand who our opponent is. And they will never say this to us up front. Listen, we are different with regards to our core values, so this war is going to look like this or like that. We have to discover it on our own, and this is why I'm doing the research. So what struck me and what was the reason that pushed me towards starting a PhD research was the observation that civilians are targeted in the war in Ukraine in equal measure to soldiers. So this is not a typical conflict in which we have soldiers fighting soldiers. This is a conflict in which, first of all, one country was illegally attacked, but secondly, we have regular kinetic warfare, and we also have a separate type of warfare, which is conducted against civilians. It's like a two-pronged violence. And we have to ask ourselves, because we are bound by the international law of war, are these just isolated cases of the Russian soldiers' misconduct, or is the excessive use of violence a systematically used tool of statecraft? Because it's obvious that when the violence escalates, violence against civilians may happen. It also happens to the American soldiers. Although, in America, it is not a systematic tool of statecraft. If it is discovered, it's punished, and people are discouraged from following into the example of the perpetrators. However, it is not so in case of the Russian soldiers. So to make it clear from the very beginning, the Russians know very well that there exists a concept of war crime, and even though they don't subscribe to further documents that establish the international law of war, which were signed later after the Second World War, they were a party to the covenant which established the ideas of the international law of war and which defined what a war crime is. They know what a war crime is. However, even though they were a part to the Nuremberg Charter, it doesn't seem that this reflects on their military doctrine, because no norms that they were a part in establishing it in 1945 are binding to their doctrine. There is no limit to the amount of violence applied by soldiers. In stressful conditions, escalation is bound to take place in case of the Russian army. So I know it's a bit complicated, but we have to say this. Terror is the use of, traditionally, when we look at this traditionally from the point of view of social sciences, terror is the use of violence of state against civilians to intimidate its own population. Terrorism are actions of individuals or groups intended to implement the broad political agendas of these groups through the use of violence. So traditionally, we see terrorism as a small group acting against the population of the state. However, what happens if the regular kinetic warfare is accompanied by violence against civilians? We are completely unprepared to analyze the situation of a war conducted by the Russian state when they unleash the regular kinetic warfare, but they also unleash units that are either guided or composed from their special service forces that are there to intimidate civilians, to organize torture chambers, to walk around the towns with lists of everybody who is in the local government, to isolate them and execute them, to rape women. We are completely unprepared for this situation. And then I believe, as a researcher, that we can treat those units composed of soldiers and of the special forces representatives on the foreign soil that they attacked illegally as terrorist units. So we can say, because there is a definition of terrorism, who is a terrorist? That the use of violence is by all available means, the targeting of innocent civilians, the lack of scruples in the use of brutal force, the desire to spread terror, the desire to achieve political, military, ethnic, ideological, religious goals that are often irrational for non-terrorists. Well, for all the residents of Ukraine, It is completely irrational that they are being attacked by special terror units of Russian provenance, whoever they are, whether they are special forces or regular soldiers, and that they are trying to push them and to terrorize them into either oblivion or dependence on Russia. This is completely irrational. So from this point of view, we can say that Russians are unleashing regular kinetic warfare in Ukraine, but they also use units of their special forces as terrorist warfare. This is completely intentional and planned, and this is something that the West doesn't do. We don't target civilians. They do, and it is completely deliberate. What else characteristic of terrorist groups we can consider? They are nihilistic, messianic, in opposition to the world, insensitive to people suffering, ready to die. So whenever you read about the atrocities perpetrated against civilians by the Russian forces, this is it. They are nihilistic. They are messianic in the understanding that they believe Russia should be there. Although Russia is bringing nothing good to those societies. Although they have to rape and punish, rape women, murder men, isolate the children and take them away or re-educate or make them Russian to achieve those aims. This is not the realm of our norms at all. This is not the proposal of the Western culture. So the line between terror and terrorism gets blurred in the wartime conditions because Russian state deploys both terror and terrorism. And we have to understand it. On top of it, they also deploy terror against their own populace because they kill journalists, because the system of the ruling party and the special forces is so enmeshed that nobody unconnected to it is not able to participate in government in Russia. So this is this is a Leviathan, a completely different civilization. So strategic culture is how nations fight, and that's what I am actually trying to analyze. I've already shown you that they fight differently, but the strategic culture is the notion that was created here in America when the Americans were trying to understand why the Russians are different in the way they conduct warfare, especially in the context of the nuclear threat, when they were trying to understand how they can behave. But if you assume the terrorist lens, this also applies to the Cold War, because Russia was holding people hostage to the threat of the use of the nuclear weapons. This is what it was, the terrorist state at work. Okay, so what's the place of the excessive use of violence in the Russian strategic culture? Is it random or systematic? What implications does it have for the NATO countries in times of peace and in times of war? Well, we may assume that violence is not random. However, we might also be interested whether this is on the operational level or is it on the strategic level. Because operational, it might be, okay, so when the soldiers fight or when the armies fight, they allow for excessive use of violence. But if this is on the strategic level, this means this is the element of statecraft which will reappear in every next war. So even if we finish the war with Ukraine, we will have another war and we will have the same thing. We will have terrorist units deployed against civilians, violence organized to target civilians, because what is happening now is partly what Ambassador Woś was talking about earlier. People are targeted. The best families are torn apart. The men are isolated. There are prescription lists. This means the intelligence of Russia made their research. Who is the person ready to defend Ukraine? Who is the person respected in the local government? And they take men away. They rape women and they take the children from them. So precisely what was happening before. So the roots of terror in the Russian rule stretch back for hundreds and hundreds of years. But in the modern form, it started to take shape in the 19th century and followed closely the example of the revolutionary France, which was the first state in modern times which systematically deployed terror against its own populace. So it all has the roots in the Enlightenment era. But in the 19th century Russia, there were intellectuals who worked on the notion of terror as a method of wielding power in a state. And I know our time is limited, but I really have to read this to you because this is one of the main ideologues that inspired Lenin and all the other revolutionaries in Russia. He says in the Revolutionary Catechism about the attitude of society towards the people, about the attitude of socialists toward the people. The revolutionaries. Our task is terrible, total, universal, and merciless destruction. This is the ideological root of the Russian strategic culture, the people who are now taking care of the Ukrainians. Therefore, in drawing closer to the people, we must above all make common cause with those elements of the masses which, since the foundation of the state of Muscovy, have never ceased to protest, not only in words but in deeds, against everything directly or indirectly connected with the state, against the nobility, the bureaucracy, the clergy, the traders, and the parasitic kulaks. We must unite with the adventurous tribes of brigands who are the only genuine revolutionaries in Russia. So the concept of power in the Russian state is that we get rid of the traditional forces that introduce hierarchy and order in the society, nobility, bureaucracy, clergy, traders, and rich peasantry, and we rely on the adventurous tribes of brigands to establish the Socialist Communist Party as the only leader. And who are the adventurous tribes of brigands? Well, these are the people who are now wielding terror upon the Ukrainian populace. These are the special forces that are deployed against civilians. So there is continuity for 150 years now. So to weld the people into one single, unconquerable, and all-destructive force. This is our aim, our conspiracy, and our task. To weld the people into one single, unconquerable, and undestructive force. This is the vision for the Russian army. This is the battering ram of Russian state, of the Russian elites. They send the ram that batters the populations, and then they establish the rule of their party and of their secret forces enmeshed in one party apparatus. So I would assume that what is happening in Russia now, and this war that we are experiencing now, is the sum total of the past communist experiences. It's not only about the Russian experience, but it's also about the, let's say, the experience of the communist revolutionary warfare all over the world. So when preparing for my research, I went to the sources. It might make you laugh that I was reading collected words of Vladimir Lenin, but this is what I did. And it was quite clear that for him the armed struggle was a code name for armed robbery. And it was good because it was getting rid of the traditional structure of the Russian society. And it was only to be criticized when party couldn't control it. So the concept of what a communist state is for and why it's conducting revolutionary warfare, it conducts revolutionary warfare to destroy traditional social structures and to enrich itself. And Lenin clearly says that a part of the money gained through revolutionary armed struggle is to serve for the purposes of the party, for the growth of the party, and the other part is to be used for the operations, for the cost. So this means for the comrades themselves. Okay, so the original this is the original ethos of the Russian revolutionary violence, which permeates its armed forces now. It's the conduct of a Russian revolutionary military of civilian has been founded on anti-values since its inception. It is hardly surprising that these anti-values are reflected by the Russian military doctrine and the conduct of wars with a pronounced tendency to resort to disproportionate offensive means and to being deployed in also against civilians as terror. So this is what their army is going to go along. So how are we to picture the negotiations? Like, what are we going to say to them? Like, stop being who you are? This is necessary for us to understand when we picture the end of the war in Ukraine. What are we going to say to them? What are the terms we can tell them if the only way of war they know is two-pronged, kinetic warfare and this part against civilians? That it's impossible to have one without the other, because this is their DNA, this is their strategic culture. And also, there is also another element which adds to it, which was analyzed by one of the authorities in the study of strategy, Colin S. Gray, who pointed out in his very well-known monograph, Modern Strategy, that guerrilla warfare, and Mao of China was one of the great specialists in guerrilla warfare, is a development of the 20th century that spurred the existence of the special forces in many modern armed forces. But this, let's say, guerrilla warfare by Mao, who is considered the best at it by strategists, was a necessary element of warfare that was supposed to precede the clash of the two armies. So what Mao said was that revolutionary warfare has three subsequent stages: political organization, guerrilla operations, and transition to regular operations of war leading to a decisive battle. So what we see in Ukraine, the political organization, were past this stage, because we had those little green men in Crimea, we had those, mock republics that made themselves independent from Ukraine and now are a part of Russia. But what is happening, the guerrilla operations are not isolated. We're not waiting for the clash of the two armies. The clash of the armies and the guerrilla operations take place simultaneously. So the Russians are working on the population of Ukraine to break their morale through guerrilla operations, terrorist operations of special units conducted against civilians, and they also are in the middle of the kinetic clash. And what is innovative in the Russian approach to the war in Ukraine, in the light of Mao's concept of revolutionary warfare, is that a general war is complemented by a regular war, terrorism. Two types of war are waged in concert in order to achieve strategic goal of complete subjugation of Ukraine and its nation. We can, I could talk for much longer about why terrorism is embedded in the Russian strategic culture, but the most important takeaway from it is that the way they wage war is different from ours because they are a different type of state. This type of state was described in detail by one of our professor emeriti, and this is the state who exists only to perpetuate the interests of the ruling class, composed of the representatives of the party and the representatives of the special forces, ensconced in one security apparatus. And it is no wonder that those people wage war just like Czechia used to wage it. They are not prepared for regular kinetic operations. They are much better suited to wield terror, because this is what they have been doing since the inception of the Soviet Russia. So it will always come out this way. So there is also a Polish twist to it, because the word operation, now they call what is happening in Ukraine a special operation. And to us, it seems, oh, they are just playing stupid, they're not saying it's a war. But to them, it's a code name, because operation is a name that was used in the past of the Russian special services for every ethnic cleansing that was organized at a mass scale. Whether it was a mass murder of the Poles or ethnic cleansing of the Volga Germans or every other ethnic operation. Operation to a Russian ear means, okay, so our guys are coming in, our special forces, and they're getting rid of whatever ethnic minority we don't want in our state. This is what it means. So can we say that terrorism is a tool of imperial conquest in terms of the Russian state? Yes, it's clear that brutal pacification and extermination of civilians is one of the methods adopted to achieve short and long-term strategic political goals. So this is who we are talking to. This is our guy that is sitting with us by the table, whom we ask, please kindly leave the territory of the Ukraine. So how are you going to force him to do it? Because it's clear that they don't abide by the basic rule of our societies. In their society, the force trumps the law, and the force is always on the side of the ruling party and the ruling special forces apparatus. But in our countries, the law comes before the force. That's why we have the idea of the negotiation, because we establish the law that both parties are going to follow. But we know they're not going to follow. When are they going to follow? They will follow if the terms on our side are backed by force. So you have to understand, and this is I believe I've grown to love America just like every American while studying here. I love this country and what it stands for. But I would like also all the American people to understand that the law comes before the force, in case of Russia, only if you stand with your army on the border. And that's the only way you can secure it. So the terrorism becomes a tool of strategic culture in the countries of a revolutionary and collectivist tradition. So this happens not only in Russia, it happens in every country when there is an element of this collectivist and revolutionary tradition. So you might have seen ISIS soldiers who are getting rid of their political opponents by killing them through shooting them at the nape of their neck. I'm sure you have seen the photos with the people kneeling on the beach and the ISIS soldiers shooting them at the nape of the neck. To a Pole, this means NKVD trained them, because this was the method in which was applied to our Polish elites during the Second World War in the Katyn massacre of our officers. 22,000 people throughout the course of several weeks were gotten rid of through this method. So this means that collectivist and revolutionary tradition has been somehow transmitted among the Muslim soldiers of the ISIS. How? This is to be discovered, but you have to be aware that there is a continuity not only between the former Russian states and the present Russian state, but also in all the organizations that were spurred by this state abroad. So this is very important in light of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, that there is something communist to it that you have to discover. And what are the security scenarios in the international arena? Realism. realism. You just are, it is just impossible to sit by the negotiation table if on the one side sits the law comes before the force, and on this other side the force trumps the law. Because they will expect you to use force. They would have used force. They will use force. So please remember about that. If you want to use this presentation or talk about this presentation, please contact me. Oh, where's the last slide? There it is. And I thank Ambassador Vosch for this opportunity to speak to you today. I hope you will have some takeaways. And I will forever and eternally be grateful to Dr. Lenczowski and the IWP for teaching me all that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Milda Mataciunaite is the Director of Fellowships and Coalitions here at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, leading outreach, partnerships, and programs for scholars studying communism's legacy. She previously directed transatlantic leadership programs at the Center for European Policy Analysis and worked at the Lithuanian Embassy in Washington, D.C. Her expertise includes public diplomacy, transatlantic relations, and Baltic security. And she loves talking about Lithuania, which is what she's going to give a short 15-minute presentation on VOC, as well as a couple of things about our museum, but especially her life growing up in Soviet Lithuania.
Thank you so much, Colleen, for such a kind introduction. I guess Lithuania is a little sister to Poland, so I'm going to go quickly. Thank you so much to Ambassador Vosch for organizing this. This is such a pleasure to have such a great group. As Colleen mentioned, and Ambassador Vosch already presented Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation and our mission. So I'm going to quickly skip through few of these quotes. I usually do these presentations to school groups, middle school and high school students, so they do receive more information, excerpts from curriculum. I think this is a different presentation. Okay, I'll improvise then. Just quickly about the curriculum. VOC has a full classroom curricula developed for middle school, high school students, and it is available online and also on Amazon for purchase. We also have terrific resources and workbooks and teacher trainings that we organize. And I am basically a resource as a witness story to these students that come and visit us. Let's see if the real one will come up. Yes, let's see. Yes, this is it. I'm so sorry. Yeah, so basically VOC has 3 core programs that we focus on. Our student and teacher education through curricula, as I mentioned, and teacher trainings. We also do policy relevant research by our China Studies program and Latin America Studies program. They do terrific work with the US government and activists in Latin America and do groundbreaking research. And obviously this museum in Washington, D.C. that serves as our schoolhouse where we host groups, students, teachers, and visitors such as yourselves. This quote, again, I chose this quote and I'm going to actually just quickly talk about it because it speaks so much to me and I relate to what Ambassador Vosch shared and watching her aunt's witness testimony and also hearing Maria speak about it, that communism, and I tell the students, not only takes your property, not only your house, your car, your families, your wealth, but also takes everything who you are. Entire innate human nature, strips you off of your soul. So I always emphasize that freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of choice and thought is absolutely taken away by communist government and communist regime. And I remember that well. I'm going to skip through this really quick. being a little girl growing up in Soviet Lithuania. This is me in the middle picture with my mom getting ready to start a school year. This is September 1st. Usually the school year starts on September 1st, and it's traditional to bring a carnation. That's very, to me, it still has a Soviet connotation to a teacher. But you can see how everything looks gray, broken, the pavement, Soviet cars. And the building that I grew up in, this is not the building, but it looked exactly the same. They were sort of cookie cutter communal apartments. And myself, my brother, my mom and I grew up in one room, not bedroom, just one room separated by curtains for so-called privacy, and also sharing communal kitchen with 5-6 families. So obviously the hygiene conditions weren't as great as you can tell. Just a few memories, again, from school. I have the red line pointed to me in this picture as a second grader in school, and obviously wearing Soviet uniforms, neatly pressed, and wearing Soviet symbolism. I don't know if anybody could tell maybe whose face that is in this pin. No? That's a question I ask students as well. It's a good one. Anyone? Good first gallery hint. Lenin. Yes. So it's a Lenin. Good job. Lenin as a child, and why? And as in second grade, we were called Octobrists because of October Revolution. So it was symbolic and to wear Lenin's star, so we could relate being a second grader to little Lenin. So communist government groomed little kids to become and yearn and seek to become someone like Lenin. So when you're in 5th grade, you become a pioneer, and then you wear a red scarf, and then further on, you become a communist youth in university, and obviously the end goal is to join Communist Party. This is a brutal memory. Which school in the United States or in Western world has dentist office? In our schools, we had dentist office as such with terrible equipment where there would be some sort of intimidation to students where your name would be called by the list alphabetically to go to the dentist office and basically getting your teeth ruined. It was terrifying, actually. I tell that to my kids and the students, and it's really hard to believe. But obviously, equipment was outdated. There were no painkillers, no medication as such, and that's how business was conducted. I also remember, obviously, growing up, looking at empty shelves, standing in line for food, and receiving special ratios for family per certain time frame per month. We would run out, obviously, of just basic goods such as, hot dogs or bread, flour, pickles. I'm not even talking about bananas or oranges. We have a special story on that. Exotic fruit was only available for certain occasions, such as Christmas. And I think I had a banana for the first time when I was 13 years old, so I still value it till today. These unsanitary stations, so-called gazirovka, which meant sparkling water. 1 kopeka, 1 cent was without syrup, 3 were with syrup, and everybody used the same glass. So you wash it somewhat, but obviously you can only imagine. But now to sort of a happier part, and I'm going to try to be quick, but this really is ingrained in my memory, and this is why Lithuania always aligned with values with U.S., and a big reason for that is that I'm here as well, was the fact that Lithuanians resisted, of course, throughout entire occupation period with arms and forest brothers, huge resistance movement, one of the longest in the region. But also during the time frame of 1987 and 1991, Lithuanians, Latvians, and Estonians joined in arms in terms of peaceful revolutions. artists came out ridiculing government and that way mobilizing the society to come and kind of speak out and kind of gain that courage, because everybody lived in fear. If you spoke against the government, you end up in prison. Another way that Lithuanians especially fought against Soviet Union was through sports and basketball. Lithuanians were one of the best basketball players in I guess I would say Soviet Union, and they were forced to represent Soviet Union, were jerseys that said SSSR, Soviet Union. But the change happened when those basketball players started trickling into United States and joining NBA teams. So there's a great story about it where a few basketball players met Grateful Dead's publicist, Dennis McNeely, who felt bad for, obviously the team didn't have any resources for the jerseys to participate in Barcelona Olympics in 1992. So the T-shirt was designed, and it's really popular. I don't know if you've seen Friends, Phoebe's wearing it, and a few Hollywood actors. And it's depicting a skeleton. So that's Lithuania coming from nothing, dunking the basketball into victory, coming from ashes. And there's a great story. The story is told in this documentary, The Other Dream Team. So Lithuania won against Soviet team in the Olympics and won the bronze medal. So obviously this was a victory, not in sports or the fact that it won a medal, but won politically. We won our freedom. And you already saw in the third gallery, one of the peaceful protests was the Baltic Way. And I tell the students, and it's such a phenomena, that without cell phones, social media, or any other means to communicate and mobilize 2 million people. This lasted about, 10 minutes or so, but this entire human chain stretched across the entire country of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and I know a few countries such as Hong Kongians, I think they tried to replicate this to demonstrate solidarity and calling the West to admit our freedom. So here's the aftermath, obviously an independent Lithuania, and it's a very concise way to show this because there were a lot of outbreaks to suppress the civilians. Tanks rolled out in 1990 winter, crushing young protesters at the TV tower, I think I skipped that slide, at the TV tower, at the Parliament building. So people resisted, unarmed, even, kind of disregarded the government warnings, not to come out, to stay safe. And I remember my parents grabbed us, my brother and I. We stood there at the bonfire trying to protect, obviously our freedom. And the chilling sound of tanks rolling by, I'll never forget that. But this courage, it was just hard to explain. People didn't move. They froze. And I remember my mom telling me, we couldn't move. We froze and stood there. So no fear, and obviously, very, very well-earned freedom. And we did have an exhibit. I'm so proud. This was probably last spring. Colleen, I already forgot. It's been a while. So it was great to work with museum in Vilnius that brought this terrific exhibit explaining this entire story, how Lithuania was free before occupation, obviously suffered deportations and suppression of culture and our national heritage, but we resisted, we persevered, and we became free in 1991. So that's really quick. I hope I made it in time. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Please feel free to email me or ask Colleen at Ambassador Vosh. Thank you so much.
I know there'll be an enormous amount of questions. We can stay if you would like, or we can just ask individual questions. There's one point I wanted to make, because when we speak our heritage and our histories, it's important to know these were countries that were thriving. We weren't third world poor countries in this is what you're seeing. These were countries that were the head in everything. And my goodness, the Ukraine feeding the world, and now, then communism comes in and starves, God knows, millions of them, and now the war again in the Ukraine. We come from cultures that are 1,000 years of culture and heritage and tradition and religion and economies and trade and education. And communism came in and destroyed it. And from the outside geography. But yes, communism destroyed it. So it's important to know it's not that, because sometimes you look at these pictures and it's hard to imagine what was before then. So I just wanted to make that point. So we are available. I thank you for your lecture. Your lecture it's perfect, because when it comes to current events right now, we know. Correct. Remember, Germany paid for World War II in public opinion, in history, in documentation, in the legal system, in crimes against humanity. Russia never did. Let's not forget that. Russia never did. And let Russia, through history, through hundreds of years, culturally, through history, who they are, they're not like us. And they don't act like us. And they will never stop unless they're forced to stop. Period.
How effective do you think NATO is in terms of the reality of what Russia really is?
I think we might be very effective, given the fact that the countries that used to be under the communist yoke are the NATO allies. I think this is the resource of knowledge to which we can tap into, and that can be used to the advantage of the entire alliance. What needs to be remembered is that Europe is it is a union, but it is not a federation. So each of those states associated within the European Union has their own political interests and their own economic interests. So the idea that Germany somehow represents the interests of Europe because this is the biggest country of the European Union, which is the idea that I came across in Washington, does not apply to NATO, because geopolitical interests of Germany have always been different to the geopolitical interests of France or Poland or Great Britain that no longer is in the European Union. So what is the most important is to figure out what NATO would like to achieve in Europe. Because we need to remember that Xi Jinping is saying that 2027 is going to be the year of war in the Pacific theater. So this means that America will need to focus on the Pacific theater, and this means that Putin has 2 more years to get by to be able to mobilize in 2027 when Americans will be busy elsewhere. So I believe NATO can be very effective, but what needs to be understood is that this war cannot end in a regular negotiation. This negotiation, if it comes to it, needs to be backed up with substantial American presence so that the Russians see that if they try to break the terms of the agreement, there will be consequence to it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Does this reply to your question? Welcome. Dr. Lenczowski, if I may ask.
Thank you, Maria, for a brilliant presentation. You mentioned that remains to be seen the origin of the transmission of these methods of execution from the terrorism by radical Islamists of the kind until of the kind that we've seen in the last many decades until the Soviet Union started doing that for these particular terrorist groups, and it's been transmitted throughout the radical jihadist network.
So my sensation was good that Russia was involved. So maybe we can also posit that in this conflict between Israel and Palestine, we might see the same, that now they are using terror as their method. So we may also expect that if they have more forces, they will also use regular kinetic operations because of the two-prong activity I mentioned. They are able to deploy only terrorist forces now. So we may expect more if they get support from elsewhere. Next question, please. Yeah?
I'm interested in your educating the high school students. Two questions. How do you communicate the availability of that to the teachers? And do you ever mention socialism in relation to
This is the question to Milda.
So in terms of how to communicate this to teachers, as I mentioned earlier, we do have teacher trainings, and the curriculum that is available in published version, printed version, and also online. And the Critical Teaching Act, Karina is our Director of Government Relations. Maybe you can talk about that. That is really important, I think. Yes.
Well, and this is what VOC is very good at. So from, I don't know if we have an example, I think we gave it to one of our youngest, yes. Do we have the book that, can your daughter just show, if you can just show the book really up high. If this is a book, one of our VOC products for youngest of children. So we have a curriculum and books for multiple age groups that are appropriate for the understanding of that age group, and that is one. Can you read the title of that book?
Mia's First Potato Chip.
Mia's First Potato Chip. So we make it understandable, the concepts to, and we have stories about food.
Orange, banana.
Yes, the orange story or the banana. So we have these products. If I can perhaps ask how you can help, is actually make sure that you look at the website for VOC, and you can't just do voc.org because you'll get Voice of China. They're really good at it. Okay, so don't point that in. But yeah, so number one, and perhaps if there's any brochures we can give on VOCs, you're leaving downstairs. So please log into the website so you can become familiar. On it are not only events, but on it are teaching material that can be used. And the resources at VOC, whether it's to help with the legislative arm, whether it's to help with the educational arm, or brilliant guest speakers, we can do anything that you will need to help the bigger good of educating the next generation. If we don't do that, we haven't done our part. General.
So just an observation. First of all, the speakers were phenomenal, and thanks for making this available to those who attended last night's gala. But as I look around, this is a microcosm of those who attended. You said something very important that I think was great for all of us, and that is every one of the countries that fell into the Soviet Union after WW2 were thriving. Those of us that fought the Cold War look now and say they're all thriving. All of them. Lithuania notwithstanding. And I talk to people in Lithuania often, and they're being probed every day. Okay? 2027 is just around the corner. Whether that's the year or not, history will tell. But looking west and looking east and try to cover both from the cold start we have today, which is not where we ended the Cold War, we're behind. So this education is probably more important than anything. You've done such a great job as the president of IWP. This is a foundational piece of all of that for, I think, growing students in the future, graduate students. Perhaps since you've solved all the infrastructure projects, those of you that went to the chancellor's meeting, you heard, we have no funds today that we're raising for infrastructure because the ambassador and her staff solved those. Remember, that's a big one. The funding is much better today, but it is not where it needs to be. Perhaps this is our project going forward. To take one state at a time and says, you know, for this school district, that's wonderful, but the thing probably holding us back the most, besides politics, is funding. So maybe to follow up all those, I don't know, 600 people that were there last night with a letter, email type, doesn't cost much, with a streaming link, that they can see what we saw, a piece of what we saw today. And then end it with something very important that every member of the administration tells everyone that walks in their offices today. What do you want? You need to tell me very clearly what you want. I know what you would tell them. This is what we need to have funded, and this is how much it's going to take, and we need to do it not by the 2027, but by the end of 2026, so that we can have this at every school. And let's start on the coast and work inland.
Katie, in charge of communication, we will make sure that we continue to have a greater bond between VOC and IWP. Yes. So with that, I thank everyone because it's time, and we're going to have actually, I know at 2 o'clock, we have the University of North Carolina at Wilmington coming. So please remember to refer all your universities, all your high schools, and everyone to come. VOC and IWP can create special opportunities, whether it's an hour, whether it's an afternoon, whether it's a week, a month, whatever it is, we can create educational opportunities for every age group when your groups are coming into town. With our scholar practitioner, with the tours here, anything that you need. Example, the Honors College from UNC Wilmington will be here on their tour through Washington. They will be here at 2 o'clock, as an example. So please remember that into your communities. And they were just at IWP, where they took part in a very fun opportunity we offer them. We have a panel on the day in the life of the spy. They love it. So please send your students, and please remember to, if you can find in your heart, I will shamelessly beg for money for both IWP and VOC. So thank you. We live off of contributions. Thank you.
Thank you.